But once you do that enough times, you will start to be able to picture the scenario without all that sort of hyper explicit reasoning. Welcome, everybody. Good morning. This is the 7Sage podcast. I'm ZeSean. That's Henry. We today are talking about what separates a 180 scorer from a 170 scorer, or maybe a high 160s, low 170s scorer from someone who has a true mastery of the test. Henry, I know you have some thoughts.
Wheat from the chaff, you know?
Wheat from the chaff. That's becoming our catchphrase.
The chaff being the 170 scores, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so there's a variety of things that separate 170 scores from 180 scorers, or people who are consistently getting, high
also,
marks.
Full disclosure, Henry, what was your score? Were you a 180 scorer?
No, I was a 177.
Oh, okay. I'm also
you?
a 177.
Yeah, I know. So there's not going to be any resentment between us on who got the better score or bitterness about that.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like if I took it today, I could definitely eke out perfect LR sections.
Okay. Yeah.
RC is one of those things where it's like,
it's
I don't
very
know.
humble of you.
Well, I don't know. I'll grant that like RC is tough sometimes, right? Like if you, I don't know, do you do many RC sections nowadays?
I don't. And I would say even in my final weeks of studying, I would go from a -0 to a -6 on a given RC passage. And it was like, yikes.
Yeah. That's why I said, I'm just going to hope for the best here, right? Like, at least when I was studying, to be like, we're just going to get perfect LR and we'll hope for the best. And I think that's what happened. But I guess we can, and nowadays I feel a little bit more comfortable with RC. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I guess we're talking about like what separates, someone who's getting pretty close to perfect scores with someone who's, getting great scores for sure. But they want to take a step further. And one of the broader things, and I guess we could like go down to some more specific elements, is, I think once you are a good scorer, you'll know how to do every problem individually, and you'll know how to look at an answer choice and test whether or not it's right. Like you'll look at the totality of the problem, and you'll look at the totality of the answer choice, and you'll match it and be like, okay, this satisfies what I want, and then you can keep on moving. And that's a good thing to do, right? It's a good thing to be able to do. But if you're a really good scorer, what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to like find certain shortcuts, perhaps. And you'll think about like, well, instead of thinking about like the problem on its own terms, like what is the nature of this problem? And how can I leverage that to find a right answer choice? Right. So one of the examples we could just jump into is like, I don't necessarily think this is only 180 scorers do this, right? But things like a premise to conclusion gap, right? So apples are fruit. Conclusion, apples are healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like as a 170 score, what type of answer choice like might you look for? What do you think?
Well, I would look for something that connects fruits to being healthy.
Yeah. Perfect. Right. You might look for something that says, like, if it's a fruit, then it's healthy. I think like what a 180 score might do though, is they might look at the fact that like, wait a minute, we're missing healthy, right? In the premises. And they might just look for answers that talk about healthy and put it in the necessary condition, right? So instead of just looking for an entire answer choice, what they're thinking is like there's a little piece here, right? That's missing. Let me just like look for that in the answer choices. I think that's something that 180 score. I don't know. Is that what you did? Is that what you did?
That's a great point. Like you're basically saying once you've identified the missing link, if it's a conditional reasoning problem, you can eliminate quickly anything that doesn't have that missing link in the answer choice, and also anything that doesn't have it in the necessary condition. So if you saw if healthy, immediately out. So you can start eliminating answer choices in the first 2 words, right? First few words.
Yeah.
And maybe an intuitive, and maybe this is how we're starting to describe the 180 score. I guess neither of us are one, but maybe we can tap into that.
I'll call myself a 180 LR scorer. I think you too. I'd feel very comfortable saying that. Like,
I think it's very rare for me to get an LR question wrong these days. And teaching the test has helped. But yeah, I think maybe what we're talking about is when you've become intuitive with the test and you're not rule-based, you're not sort of clunky mathematically solving everything, but you have that intuition, you can eliminate answer choices quickly. You can know what you're looking for in the stimulus, that missing link, pretty intuitively, pretty quickly. A 170 score, and this is not bad. I think if you're not a 170 score, you should absolutely do this. A 170 score might map out every conditional statement, diagram every single conditional statement, and then look for the missing link in their
Yeah.
diagrammed conditionals. The 180 score might never put their pen to the paper and just see it, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the difference we're talking about.
Yeah. And I think this is relevant too, because it's one thing to be able to, and it's a good thing too, to be able to look at the answer choice, plug that into the argument. We're talking about sufficient assumption questions here, right? Where
Sure.
you look at the answer choice, you plug it back into the argument, you read the argument, you're like, all right, conclusion's good. That's great, but as you said, like as a 180 score, what you want to be doing here is like just like what is the thing that could hypothetically work, right? Like could
Mm-hmm.
this even work, or could this even be a possibility? Like I don't need to plug this into the argument to make this work again. I think this is really relevant in with PSAA questions. I
Mm,
try to teach this in my classes too, where right, it's like you get a rule that says if you steal, you've committed a crime,
right.
and you ask yourself like, well, using this rule, what would I be allowed to conclude? Could I conclude that someone did not commit a crime?
No,
No.
never.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can't.
Yeah.
And so when you look at the answers, which are all very long because it's like a reverse sufficient assumption,
Right.
it'll say like conclusion, I did not commit a crime. And then it'll 3 lines,
Yeah.
right, about all the crimes. You say, well, this just can't be right. Like
Just
the
get rid of that.
nature of it, right? Like the way it's written, it just cannot be a right answer, regardless of whether I try to plug everything in. Like I can't get there. And so I think that's
Yeah.
one of the that's a big distinction between 180 scores and 170 scores.
That's a great example, Henry. I really like that because if if you have that intuition, if I commit a crime or if I steal, I've committed a crime. That was your conditional.
Mm.
You're either looking for a conclusion where you've committed a crime or you didn't steal. That's your contrapositive, and you would know that sort of instantly. You wouldn't have to
Yeah.
write it out and then do the contrapositive flip and then look for some. So immediately you have two options for conclusions, and you would eliminate any answer choice that wasn't one of those two options. That might narrow you down to just one, which you would pick and move on, or it would narrow you down to two, at one of which would pull some illegal move around conditional reasoning, and you would be able to spot that just kind of quickly. I think that's what you're getting at is like you're almost you're almost like thinking in terms of flow charts of like what are all the possibilities and how have I now eliminated large swaths of possibilities so I
Yeah.
can really be clear in my thinking. And so you don't have to entertain every ridiculous answer choice. You've already narrowed down like, okay, I can cut out all the so many of these possible answer choices because I know mine will fall into this. I don't know if that made sense, but
No,
I,
that
I
makes a
kind of
lot
get
of
what you're
sense.
saying. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Where
Yeah.
it's like if you know how a conditional works, you can actually eliminate a lot of things, not just based on the entirety or the totality of an answer choice, but
Right.
based on a piece of the answer choice. And I think it also revolves around like expectations, and maybe that's something else we can get into. It's like as a we'll just say high 170 score, right?
Sure.
There's a lot of trap prediction that you can make. Well,
Yeah.
you'll look at an answer choice or even a stimulus, and you'll already see like or have a sense of what type of trap they're going to employ on you. Right? The sufficient assumption example is pretty straightforward, where
Hmm.
this apple is a fruit, so conclusion this apple's healthy. You know that there's going to be an answer choice there that says if it's a if it's a healthy thing, then it must be a fruit.
Hmm.
Right? There's going to be an
Right.
answer choice that says that. And this the same is going to be said for like weakening questions or strengthening questions. Um, where you can expect to some degree, and I think it's a little bit hard. I don't know, as like now that I've done this for so long, I'm sure you're in a similar boat. It's hard for you to even like actively think about what traps would be because like you just don't even look at anything as a trap anymore. I don't. Do you feel that
Yeah, it's
way?
hard to relate to. I think, there's a word for this in the sort of like educational pedagogy realm, but
Mm.
it's sometimes hard to relate to the student who is getting trapped by something that you no longer consider a trap.
Yeah.
You have to, and I think this is maybe a powerful thing that teachers do is like step into the mindset of the student who doesn't see the trap yet. But yes, in some sense we become immune to them, and I think as you all who are watching this get better and better at the LSAT, you will become immune to traps where they just won't even look attractive anymore. They looked attractive at one point in your studying journey,
Yeah.
and now it doesn't phase you at all. You just have become so logical, so supremely logical in your process that if something doesn't make sense, you're not phased at all.
Yeah. And I think like that's like part of the journey of like getting to that 180 where you're not phased at all, but maybe you actively start thinking about it to begin with, right? So if you have an argument and it's about it's a weakening question, and all the argument is about like percentages or rates, you can look at that and say, well, let me make sure that I'm not looking at answer choices too deeply that talk about absolute values, right?
Yeah.
Where like, oh, right, this room is composed of 70% woman, and now it's only 60% woman. So there must be
Yeah.
less woman in the room, right? Well, you should look at that and say, these are percentage. This is a percentage based argument. It's not an absolute value based argument, right?
Right.
Or the premises are not absolute value. So when I look at this and say like interesting. I mean, I guess this would be more like a flaw question where the percentage has gone down, but the absolute value might not have gone down.
Yeah.
But you can expect like, oh, wait a minute, like these premises are about one type of thing. So if I want to strengthen this or weaken this, I probably can't bring in absolute values. Like I want to bring in percentages. Things like that I think are helpful on your way. Instead of just like looking at the answers like, oh, this strengthens, being like, an answer that's talking about X, Y, and Z is probably just wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Henry, you're full of so much wisdom. This is so great. And you're making me
Yeah.
think about how even in my journey, when I came across questions that were mathematical in their nature or had quantifiers, when I was, approaching the low 170s, I would do something like substitute numbers, right? I would try to mathematically solve, write it all out, and sort of prove to myself like what fits in this scenario and what doesn't. Um, as I developed a further intuition and further mastery, approaching 180, I guess I would say,
Yeah.
then I didn't have to substitute numbers anymore. I could just know what some meant or most meant kind of intuitively. And I knew that if you were talking about most of one group and most of another, that they're not necessarily the same group. And you sort of
Mhm.
learn those pitfalls and those traps around how to deal with quantifiers and quantitative reasoning. Again, when you're starting out, it's great to write everything out, map things out, substitute in numbers.
Yeah.
That would give you kind of a basis. It'll give you a footing to actually understand what they're talking about. But
Yeah.
if you want to get better, maybe you'll get to a point where you don't have to substitute numbers anymore, or you don't have to draw Venn diagrams or pie charts anymore.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a great point because like the number substitution thing, I think is really great because, if they're using a large number and a small number, but it's like weird numbers, you can usually just replace like a million versus one, right? Let's
Right.
see how this goes.
Right.
But you're so right too, because like I mean, I guess we're just now transitioning like how can this become more intuitive, which is that like a 160 score might really think through like why is it the case when I say that all countries have a president and all companies have a president, like why is it the case that companies might not be countries and countries might not be companies,
Right.
right? Like why is that a possibility? Well, it's like, okay, well, if you think about, as you said, like the Venn diagram, like everything that has a president, well, like all the countries could be in one corner, all the companies could be in another corner. There doesn't
Hmm.
have to be any overlap between the two.
Right.
And then you prove that to yourself, and that's like something like a 160 score. This is companies and country. I don't know why I'm doing this, like, but you
Well,
look at this and you say, yeah, that makes sense. But then I think what you're mentioning is like once you have that intuition, you're just going to look at those two pointing to the same necessary condition and say, there's nothing for me to know here,
mhm.
right? Like I can't really tell anything based on these two statements. Is that what I'm hearing you say to some degree?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So now when you like when they start talking about abstract concepts, chairs are furniture and love seats are furniture. Are chairs love seats? Are love seats chairs? Maybe
Right.
not. We have no idea.
We have no idea. Yeah, I think the essence of what we're talking about really boils down to like if you're in the 16, if you're in the 150, 140s, 150s, 160s, etc. If you're in that range, it would behoove you to be very explicit in your thinking, to write things out, to substitute numbers, to diagram. Make sure you can wrap your head around what is going on in an LSAT stimulus and you can picture it in your mind. But once you do that enough times, you will start to be able to picture the scenario without all that sort of hyper explicit reasoning. And refraining from that hyper explicit reasoning will make your thinking more efficient. You'll just move faster without having to write out or diagram out or substitute numbers for every single problem. And that will take you from the high 160s, low 170s into the high 170s, perhaps the low 180s. There's only one score in the low 180s, but you know
Yeah,
what I mean.
180 low, right? That's the meme, right?
1.8 low, yeah.
1.8 low, sure.
um, I was wondering, Henry, maybe I don't know if you have more to say on this, but maybe we could transition into talking a little bit about why does this matter? Like, what should people care about a 1.7 low versus a 1.7 high? Do you think? Is that
Sure.
more of
Yeah.
an
I
admissions
think it's like an
question?
admissions podcast, but I
Yeah.
mean, yes. Don't you want to get a better score?
Don't you want to? Right. For
Uh,
any person, any school, right?
oh, but I mean, no matter what. I mean, score. I mean, I guess it's admission, but like, yeah, points are money, right, on this test, or in terms of scholarship.
Indeed.
Um, but even more importantly, every point you get means that you are better than another group of people. And so, and
Yeah.
that, I mean, that's, I don't know. That was my motivating factor. I
Yeah.
was like, I
You're
mean,
like,
to
I
be
want to be
honest,
1.7 high. Yeah.
well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I was honestly, I don't say I was upset with the one. I was pretty happy with it, but I was like pretty sure I got a 180 at the end of my test. But I was very happy at a certain point. You're like, okay, whatever. It's
It's
one or two
interesting. I did
questions.
not feel that way. I thought I
Really
bombed it. Yeah. Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
I was 100% positive in LR, and then I mean, we talked like RC is a little. It's harder to know in RC what you got. You might have a general direction of how things went, but I think it's hard to know exactly which questions went right or wrong.
Yeah.
For me,
Oh, I
interesting.
guess one thing I'll add to I'll retract what I said. I didn't think I bombed it. I was hyper aware of at least two questions. I believe both were in RC. Maybe one was in LR. I was hyper aware of the few questions that I felt like I wasn't confident on,
Mm.
and that killed me. Where I was like, "There's at least two that I really was kind of like, ah." And what ended up happening was that like I only got two or three wrong on the entire test. So it came to a
Oh,
point where I was like so hypercritical of myself for even missing like a couple that I was
yeah,
like, oh man, I bombed that test. When in reality, those were the only two that I missed, and I knew exactly which ones I missed. It's like
yeah,
you come to a point where you're like, you know what you're getting right and you know what you're getting wrong,
yeah.
based on how it went, how it felt. Yeah.
Do you know what those questions like what those questions were? Do you remember anything
No, I
about
don't
them?
remember. I just remember, and I guess I don't have proof that those are the ones I got wrong. Maybe there were some other sneaky ones that I got
Yeah.
wrong, and I actually got those right. But I do remember my confidence shaking on on two questions. I don't remember what they were, but I remember two questions that I didn't feel so hot on, and I remember feeling like, oh man, like this test did not go smoothly. But I was rewarded, in the end because I
Yeah.
only got like those two or three wrong anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It sounds
yeah.
kind of similar or not similar. My first test, I bombed it. I didn't bomb it. I did worse than my PT average though. But I remember like looking at, and I guess maybe I was in this place where I was getting high 160s, low 170s, but I wasn't 100% confident. And then I remember like looking at this last question and I just like could not figure it out. And I had like, a minute and a half left.
Yeah.
This is the last question on my test. And it was an LR question. And then I was like, I forget I think I want to say it's a sufficient assumption question.
Mhm.
Um, but it might not have been. But I remember I was looking at this and I was like, oh my God, I'm thinking way too hard. Like, I literally just need to read the words on the page. That's why I get words on the page from. I literally thought, it's like, I just need to look at the words on the page.
Yeah.
It's like, they're telling me that murder is bad. The premises they've given me are a bunch of facts about murder, but they don't use the word bad. And then I like look at an answer choice and they're like, oh, this word used, this one uses bad. Like, this is the right answer choice. And I don't know. I think that was a big move for me where it's like, it felt like I was like mentally brute forcing my way through all these questions. And I was like trying to think super hard about everything. And then, in the lead up to my next test where I studied a lot less, this is anecdotal, of course, but
Yeah.
I studied a lot less. I just like started thinking way less. Like
Yeah.
I stopped like really trying to do I was just like, I don't know. I just literally looked at the words of the page and said like, what does this mean? It's like, I
Yeah.
wasn't really trying to actively like, oh, maybe there's some hidden solution in the answer choices. It's like,
Yeah.
probably not. I don't know. Is that your
Absolutely.
experience?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I really think you start feeling like you're good at this test when it becomes more of a vibes based approach
Yeah.
than a hyper calculated, diagrammed process. The other thing maybe I would add, maybe you were kind of getting at this, is like at some point, star difficulty ratings fade away for you.
Yeah.
Like that becomes like totally irrelevant. It's, you would treat a 1 star and a 5 star question pretty similarly. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but you get what I mean. that you're not hyper fixated on what star question you're going to do the same thing, read the words on the page regardless. Maybe even question type categories kind of fade away. You're just like, I have a task to do here.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just do that task. Whatever they ask me, I can do, even if they came
No,
up
for
with a
sure.
new question type, I'd be able to answer that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I agree. I guess too. I mean, of course we're being like kind of, because we're supposed to be talking about like vague, like somewhat vague things, is just recognizing various, because I'm thinking about like what makes a 5-star question, and like how a lot of 5-star questions are pretty, I find them like not too difficult. I'm kind of surprised actually anyone gets them wrong, but a lot of it is just because like I have certain expectations based on the structure. Right. So we talked about conditional arguments where it's helpful to be really good at translation, but like you've got a study and you've got a causal conclusion, and it's a weakening question. Like 99% of the time, they're going to throw in some sort of alternative explanation for the
Yeah.
premises. And if you just know to look for that, your life gets so much easier, right? On this test, where you're like, oh, it's right there. There's an alternative explanation for the premises. And so just like being able to anticipate or expect what you're going to be given is another difference maker. I don't really know what the prescription would be. I guess like what would you prescribe someone? Just try to learn to expect answer choices.
Yeah, I would say this is hard because the I think what we're getting at is the process changes. Like if
Yeah.
you're in the 150s, you want to do that sort of hyper explicit type
Yeah.
of reasoning we were talking about. I guess if you're already in the high 160s, low 170s, maybe the sort of prescriptions would be, try to put the pen and paper away. Maybe that's
Mm.
one idea, right?
Yeah.
Try to make your thinking more efficient. Maybe try to uh I don't know, read the stimulus only once. Maybe
Yes.
force yourself to be efficient and
Yes.
to maybe run with the weights on a little bit and see if you can get through it. Because I think, at least 5 to 8 times out of 10, you will find that you really didn't need that process if you've gotten good at it. Like maybe you
That is
didn't
true.
need those crutches of writing it all out or reading it multiple times or, et cetera. I think if you can start putting yourself in an environment or in a mindset where I'm like treating this stimulus casually. That maybe
Mm.
this is one thing I liked to do is like I would just do an LR question on the bus. Um,
Mm.
just open one up on the 7Sage app on my phone
Yeah.
and
It's so
see.
convenient.
So convenient, by the way. And
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
not an
Yeah.
advertisement, but
Yeah. So convenient. Wow.
open up the
Study
7Sage app,
anywhere.
make a drill of one LR question, 5 stars, whatever. And I could just see, like, as everybody else is scrolling on their phone, I would maybe pretend to be scrolling on my phone, but I was really doing LSAT and
Mm.
see if I could just look at something kind of casually, kind of read through it and be like, I got it, and answer it. And if you
Yeah.
can get to that point where it feels a little casual, like you don't need to lock in, then you're in great shape.
Yeah.
If
Well, no,
you can,
yeah. If
yeah,
you can get there, it's great. But I also think just like trying to embody that is also helpful too, because there's when you find yourself thinking too hard, it's either a sign that one, you don't really understand a fundamental, or you're not looking at the words on the page correctly. Right. Like I truly believe that, where like if you have to really think about an answer choice, there's something else going on, because once you know what the right answer is, a lot of times these questions are pretty easy. And so getting yourself into a mode where you're like treating it casually, I think can help you avoid like trying to like look at answers in the most deep possible way, and thinking about every possible like little issue, which is helpful early on because we're naturally more generous than we should be when we first start studying. But
yeah,
then we can also rubber band on the other side, where everything begins to look like an issue and we're really trying to consider the problem on its merits. I guess as an aside too, it's like it, casual treatment of a problem kind of, at least for me, also revolves around just the fact that like I don't think you don't have to think too hard about the content a lot of the time. Right? It
right,
doesn't matter if your correlation is about chocolate and getting Nobel prizes, or smoking and cancer,
right, yeah,
or
right,
fatalities and phone use. They're all correlations, right? And then you see causation in the conclusion. So instead of like thinking about like, oh well, does this answer choice really get at this idea of driving, right? It's about using your phone and driving, or they're talking about like wireless signals and etc. You probably don't need to think about that, right? You probably just need to think about like, okay, alternative explanation. yada yada yada. And I think that kind of casual treatment, if you recognize that structure, you would know to do that. You're like, do I really need to know anything about cars for this to work? Probably not.
Yeah, that's another good point. Is like I find that a lot of my students they talk about early on. They're like, we kind of joked about this in another podcast episode of like, there's so much content on the LSAT that I'm learning. I'm learning all these little tidbits, and that's great because when you're starting out, I think what I'm hearing is people get fixated on the content. They're absorbed in the content of the LR stimulus. But when you become more advanced, you will never remember the content of any stimulus you read
Yeah.
because it was totally irrelevant. All you're thinking about is structure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I find that the novice students walk away remembering a lot of content, maybe not a lot of structure. I remember zero content from LR stimuli. Yeah.
I mean, you could have said it better. I remember literally zero. It's like, I mean, I know of them because I've seen them a lot of times, but like you look at a stimulus, you're just like, okay, whatever this is, it doesn't really matter that much. Tracheophytes.
Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to offer a quick correction from Eric, our producer. We don't have the 7Sage app anymore, but the new website is optimized for mobile. So replace my story. I'll say I used to be on the bus and I would open up the 7Sage mobile site, so conveniently optimized for my mobile device, and I would do an LR question casually.
Even more convenient, honestly. Yeah. You don't need an app. I feel like nowadays you need an app for everything. It's pain.
Right. Yeah, apps are annoying. Does anyone use apps anymore? I think the whole premise of apps is just gone. We don't like when the iPhone was first launched, apps were like the coolest thing.
Yeah.
That was what the whole point of the device was. Now, like, we don't really think about apps.
You can order food without an app now. It's great.
Yeah, just in browser. It's
because they want to harvest your data, right?
Yeah.
Or something along those lines. I hate it when I have to download an app to do anything. It's like, download an app to pick up this prescription or whatever.
Do you use any apps? Like, is there an app that you use on your phone? Like that you go for this app does something for me. That's not social media.
Okay, that's a good qualifier there. That's not social media. My banking app, maybe, but like on but I really just use the Apple like wallet. I don't really know. You're right. I basically nothing. Training Peaks. I don't know if anyone does endurance sports. You'll know what that is. It's Strava, but Strava's social media. So
yeah, I guess Strava counts like an app for tracking fitness.
Yeah. Kind of. I don't know. Apps are useless. I guess you have music apps and whatnot. All right, we gotta get on. Anyway, sorry, that's an aside. Thank you guys so much. Like, comment, subscribe.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.
Join us on the mobile website.
Indeed.
Yeah,
we'll see you there. We'll see you on 7Sage Mobile. Peace.